Previously on Maplestory the novel, Sacred Tears.
Is there some fire-breathing creature behind the storm?
Humans tend to pry into things that are better left alone.
If this disaster did not exist, I would still have chosen you.
Don't insult me! You're the one responsible!
I'm not trying to be mean. You've suffered, but channeling your anger like this won't honor their memory.
And now the continuation of Chapter 12, Part 2.
Pharamund noticed the others inching closer, making him shift his stance lower.
Come on, James, wrap it up, he thought. The man looked down at his dagger, opening his fingers slightly to look over the polished wood handle.
You might be right, cleric,
He murmured, grabbing James's hand, hauling him close and plunging his dagger through his gut while leaning down to his ear.
but I will act on it rather than wallow in my tears.
James! Pharamund cried out, readying to teleport forward when he felt a sharp pain in his back, watching a sword appear from his chest. Pharamund stared down at the blade in shock, watching his blood streak the steel and stain his robes. A third man drove a dagger through James's lower back, twisting hard, making him gasp silently as pain ripped through his body. Pharamund fought against the sword's cold stun, pulling away from the man with a swing of his staff. A pulse of light knocked the man to the ground. Small spears of light caught the other two men by the sleeves, pinning them to the buildings. In his adrenaline-fueled actions, he overlooked the fourth man in the group. Another dagger plunged into his back, making an arctic cold flood his chest. He turned and slammed his staff into the man's head, staggering to James.
Pharamund, I can't feel my legs.
James wheezed as Pharamund picked him up. Fatigue washed over him and searing hot spears stabbed his chest as he breathed. Hang on, James, he coughed, blood painting his mouth. Agony racked him as he reached into his pocket for his prism, holding it up to the light. Just as the transport spell was activating, one of the men charged. Light enveloped them all, taking them to the newly finished Aurora chapel, where the man tumbled across the floor, locking his gaze onto Viren and lunging with a feral yell. Ah! Viren quickly knocked the dagger away, pinning him to the wall with spears of light.
Acolytes, attend James and Pharamund!
Mars called. The newest recruits rushed to their teacher's side, carrying both of them to the infirmary. Pharamund could be heard heaving with gurgling breaths as he was taken away.
Why did you attack these clerics? What wrong have they done to you?
Mars demanded as Viren held him in place.
Are you that sect leader who preaches they're dealing with the monsters?
The man shouted, struggling to free himself from the spears of light.
I oversee the Aurora until our Master Dane returns. I ask you again, why have you attacked these clerics?
Mars narrowed his eyes, noting the haze of darkness surrounding the man.
This whole sect is responsible for the loss of my older brother and father. Those things almost took my wife, and yet you stand here in your rich temples and do nothing. Tell me what you are doing to stop them, instead of being escorts to the rich and the nobles!
We of the Aurora have our limits. You are not the first to bring this to our attention. The Aurora is currently the only order trained to handle the omens.
Lies! If you were truly the only sect capable of taking on the monsters, you would have been able to do so much more! You also claim to be helping with the famine, but I have seen you do nothing but escort the wealthy and royalty!
Look around you! Do you honestly believe we have endless resources at our disposal? Only recently have we begun training others. We can't protect every city. We can only suppress the most dangerous omens.
Mars shouted in return, his voice thundering through the entire chapel, turning it silent. An Acolyte's running steps cut through the silence, the color draining from Mars's face after hearing what the Acolyte whispered to him.
Thomas, Eleanor, take this man to the broom closet and keep him there until I say otherwise. Viren, go with them to ensure nothing happens,
he commanded, jogging to the infirmary.
Master Tasia!
An Acolyte called, laying James on a bed while 2 more Acolytes sat Pharamund down on another. Tasia looked up from her medical alchemy notes, her eyes becoming massive in horror.
What happened to them?
She called, running to Pharamund first and looking over the sword sticking out of his chest.
Pharamund attacked us,
James gurgled. Tasia quickly looked over their wounds, calling for bandages and salves. With quick movements, she stopped his bleeding and covered the wounds, moving to Pharamund and again using the balm to stop the bleeding.
The blade has gone entirely through your lung and 3 ribs. Just try to relax.
Grabbing a nearby parchment, she drew a circular matrix and pressed it over the blade's point to his skin.
Brace yourself,
she warned. Pharamund nodded as Tasia tapped the matrix. The flesh around the blade widened, allowing her to pull the sword free without further harm. She left a few drops of staunching salve in the wound and slowly closed it over, which was also done for James's injuries.
I can't feel my legs,
James wheezed. Tasia carefully turned James on his side, feeling the color drain from her cheeks.
What's wrong?
He grunted as Tasia lowered him back down.
It looks like one of the knives cut clean through your spine. I don't know how to repair this injury.
I thought Master Dane had taught you medical alchemy for this very reason.
He taught me how to use it, but it still requires knowledge of the human body to use. This kind of injury is far beyond what I am familiar with.
They sighed heavily. Tasia could eventually learn how to heal James's spine, but it would take many months before she could even attempt it with any confidence. Until then, James would be confined to a bed or chair. Tasia looked up from her hands, about to explain what it would mean for him, when she noticed something strange about his appearance. Tasia could see the color fading from his hair and wrinkles beginning to appear with a closer look. Glancing at Pharamund, she could see the same thing happening to him.
Get Mars! Hurry! Get Mars! Hurry!
Tasia demanded, reaching into her cabinet of medical supplies and injecting Fern's dew into them in hopes to counter what she thought to be poison. Nothing she did seemed to be slowing the aging down. After pressing an alchemic matrix to their chests, she saw the entirety of their bodily functions were slowing down as if they were indeed aging.
What's wrong?
Mars demanded as he entered.
I've healed their physical wounds, but they are aging rapidly. Whatever this is, it's beyond my abilities.
Take these 2 to the laboratory,
Mars commanded, following close behind. Inside his lab, Mars summoned the twins, hoping they could offer any insights he was missing. As he waited, Mars passed his healing spells over them, attempting to find the problem.
What do you mean you don't know what's wrong? Can't you see it?
Orchid exclaimed, pointing to the air above Pharamund.
There is nothing to see, child!
Mars angrily shouted, shifting the intensity of his spell to isolate and stop the aging. Orchid rolled her eyes, grabbing either of his temples and turning his head towards the air above them. Mars blinked as a surge of power buzzed in his head when a pale blue trail of glistening smoke rising from James and Pharamund appeared.
By the Great Mother! What in all light is that?
He shouted.
Don't you humans know anything? Someone is taking this guy's life force!
Orchid huffed.
But how? The only thing that's happened to them is the stabbing!
Orchid let go of Mars's head and the cloud faded from sight.
Aren't you supposed to be the smart ones on this? How come you can't see it? It's totally obvious!
Lotus growled. Mars called to one of the acolytes, requesting Tasia's presence while grabbing sheets of parchment and scrolling spell circles onto them, where he placed the ends of his shining rod.
I'm here, Mars. What is it?
James and Pharamund's life forces are being drained with a spell. I could try to isolate and nullify the spell, but I need you to watch over them while I do so.
Mars grunted, light appearing from his staff and encompassing both his friends.
Orchid! Lotus! Your assistance, please!
Mars demanded. Lotus and Orchid sighed, but came to his aid, standing to the sides while holding their palms forward and amplifying his magic. Tasia moved almost in a blur between them, using salves, pastes, herbs, and alchemic matrices to maintain their bodily functions. Mars was able to isolate the spell and slow it down significantly, but not stop it entirely. Hour by hour, their life force slipped away before Mars's eyes, until his strength failed several hours later. Mars pulled himself up to Pharamund's bed, collapsing onto the mattress, too exhausted to fully cry in frustration. Orchid and Lotus simply left, unsure what they should do, as Tasia pulled the covers over their faces and sat next to Mars.
Mars, we did everything we could.
She soothed, placing a hand on his.
But it wasn't enough! They were my brothers, and I failed them!
Mars whimpered.
Where's the sword that stabbed Pharamund?
He grunted, using his staff to stand once again.
It should still be in the infirmary. Why?
Bring it to me, but be careful not to touch the blade,
he instructed. When Tasia returned with the sword, Mars cast numerous detection and magical decryption spells over it, unable to find any spells on the blade. He called for Orchid and Lotus again, hoping they could see anything covering the sword, but they couldn't see anything either. Looking to his closest friends, he clenched his jaw, then left to gather supplies throughout his lab.
And where are you going, human?
I am going to find where the life force was taken. If I have not returned within 4 days, I would like you and the Master to come and find me.
Orchid huffed and threw her arms wide.
Oh, come on, Marcy. Just because Dane's away doesn't make you the master of the Aurora.
Lotus simply scowled in his direction.
I know it doesn't. I ask you to tell the Master what I am doing, if he should return before I do. Whomever is able to drain a life force like this must be very powerful.
Telling Viren of his quest, Mars appointed him as interim leader of the Aurora. As he walked out the door, Eleanor ran after him, pulling on the last of her heavy armor.
Mr. Mars, you shouldn't go alone. Allow me to accompany you,
she called.
I know you want to prove yourself, but I think I'll be fine.
You said it yourself. Whoever has the power to drain a life force is powerful. Going on your own would be a fool's errand.
Mars sadly chuckled at her eagerness.
I may not be as powerful as Master Dane, but I know a thing or two,
Mars insisted, quieting her third protest and leaving her at the door. As he walked, Mars concentrated, thinking back to those few moments when Orchid grabbed his head. Sometimes he could see remnants of blue smoke hanging in the air, leading to the west.
Good work, gentlemen. I'm sure that will get his attention.
Hilda smirked, slowly waving her hand over a bottle, where a gentle stream of glistening blue smoke gathered and distilled into a thick liquid. The 3 ragged men she spoke to stared blankly at the bottle as it filled, one of which pressed a question.
So where is our money?
He asked with a huff.
Don't worry, you'll be compensated.
I thought we agreed payment was due after attacking the Aurora priests,
one of the men asked.
I did, but only when I've received my prize. And it hasn't come yet. You will be paid when it comes,
Hilda repeated deviously, looking up from under her lowered brow. She rested her chin on the back of her hand before turning her attention back to the bottle.
That wasn't our deal, Hilda. You promised payment now!
The man barked, slamming his hands down on the table where Hilda sat. She looked at him again, her golden brown eyes now dark with malice.
I would watch your tone, mercenary. I could have easily taken those clerics myself. However, that would defeat its purpose. You will receive your payment, you can be sure of that. But if you press the issue further, I can and will revoke the deal.
The man backed down, unnerved by the cold and unfeeling light in her eyes, calling the other two men to leave with him. Hilda smirked, her fire-red hair caught in a slight desert wind.
I haven't forgotten about you, white mage.